hand over to Tom, who's just going to tell us what we think about leveling up, some of the aspects of data, but also a little bit of a hint about what he's going to talk about later on when he demonstrates our dashboard.
Thanks, Paul. First of all, my apologies to the events team running this, because I managed to get logged in about 3 seconds ago after restarting my computer, but that's the joy of the internet and live streaming. In the end, no one noticed, right? Paul stylishly covered for me. So welcome everyone, thanks for coming. Leveling up is probably something that we've been thinking about here in Leeds for nearly a decade. It's part of what we're about. And I think that it's really welcome that for the last 2 or 3 years, it's become absolutely mainstream in terms of UK politics and UK discussions in lots of different places, right? So it's obviously the word was used in the Conservative Manifesto, but the concept has been around for a very long time. And I think that what we started to see when the word was used and when the word was, I would say, overused, was that people couldn't define what they meant by levelling up. And a lot of people have been critical of that, but I actually think it's a good thing. It's inevitable. We are a country that loves complexity. Now, I have my issues with complexity, but as a country, we love it. And that means that levelling up will inevitably be, I think, all things to all people. That's the only way to build a consensus for it, but also will be contested. And I'm going to outline 6 things, 6 different visions of levelling up. And I think that the 6 different visions ultimately are about 2 choices. And the first choice is, do we care about places or do we care about people? And the obvious response to that is, of course, we care about both. But which do we care about more? So this is a very important question in terms of countries and how they think about themselves. If we think about England, if we think about France, these are people countries. These are countries where we are one unit, one body of people. When we talk about fighting poverty, fighting exclusion, we think about doing it everywhere in the country for everybody here. We have in this country a National Health Service that provides equal care, equal health care to all people. We care about everybody and all people. So when we talk about, let's say, fighting poverty, in England, we talk about targeting the areas where people are poor, wherever they are poor. There's another type of way of looking at levelling up, which is quite foreign to us in this country. It has some elements of thinking about it within the UK, but within England, it's quite foreign to us. And these are the ways that many countries such as Germany, Canada, Australia, the EU, the USA think about levelling up in a very different way. They don't think so much about people as they think about places. And of course, places are made up of people. That's what places are. They're not really points on a map. They're the people who choose to live in those points on the map or work on those points on the map. People who have family at those points on the map. But when they talk about, let's say, fighting poverty, often the way that they will think about things is in a decentralized way. They will say, this place has high poverty. We need to get resources to them so that they can fight that poverty locally. So we have the people approach, which is we will treat the whole country equally, and people will be targeted to be brought out of poverty, helped to achieve as much as they can wherever they are equally. That's your people view. And we have a places view, which says we'll look at where in the country is doing well and where in the country is struggling more, and we will assign resources to the different places such that they themselves can work on the problems that they think are important. I think there's another split that we have, which is a 3-way split, and that's between what we think we want to achieve with levelling up. Do we want to improve the strength of the economy? That is usually measured in something like GDP. It could be measured in wages. It could be measured in corporate profits. These are the type of words and numbers that people who talk about the economy being important use. we might think that actually the economy and GDP aren't that important. What we care about is the money in people's pockets, their purchasing power, what they can afford to do. Can they afford to take the bus? Can they afford to put food on their families' tables? Can they afford a nice new car? Can they afford a home extension? That's actually a little bit different to the way of thinking about levelling up in terms of the economy. The economy, as I say, is thinking about GDP, wages, but purchasing power doesn't necessarily mean that. When we have taxes and when we have benefits, the amount of money that people have is very different, in fact, to the productivity of the economy that they live in. And we see that in lots and lots of places. We have very strong economies in England where people really struggle with money. So the perfect example of that is much of inner London has an extremely strong economy and extremely high poverty. And we see other places in the UK where people live in areas with quite a weak economy, but have, considering the weakness of the economy, a good quality of life, money to spend, and their problems are less than you would expect given the quality of the economy near them. And I think the final thing, in addition, you can be an economy person, you can be a money person, and last of all, you can be an outcomes person. And outcomes people tend to look at things like education quality, healthcare quality, life expectancy, well-being. I'm looking forward to a talk about well-being later because I think this is absolutely fascinating that the UK has really led on collecting data on well-being. And ultimately, I think most people agree instinctively that well-being matters much more than anything else. No one experiences GDP. No one really experiences tax credits. What they experience is what GDP and what tax credits let them do, and that is have a fulfilling and rich life, and that's what well-being may or may not be about. We also care about things like migration, inwards and outwards. That's especially important, I think, within England and the UK in terms of age structures. So we care about places that are getting younger, places that are getting older, sometimes disconnects between generations as a result. And we care about things like housing costs as well. So I think there's these distinctions that I would draw between people who mostly think about leveling up in terms of people, or those who mostly think about leveling up as places. And then there's people who think, in addition to which way they chose on those two things, think about the economy, or they think about money, or they think about outcomes. And I wanted to give an example of some well-known, most of these are kind of policy institutes, and I think it's useful to use policy institutes and think tanks to just give a flavor or give an idea of which people sit where in this discussion, because I think that they're allowed to have public opinions about this. We may think that government and political parties have certain opinions on these things, but they generally will not be quite so open about them. So if you want to talk about think tanks and policy institutes and researchers who care about places more than people, they care about people, but they care about the people because of where they live. That would be someone like Centre for Cities, obviously Centre for Towns, but you also get people like Centre for Policy Studies who've recently published a report looking at places very specifically. And you'd have something like IPPR North as well. So IPPR North, the clue's in the name that they care about places. They care specifically about the North within the UK. If we think about places that are more interested in people, you'll generally find national institutes, but you'll also find places that are very interested in inequality across the whole of society more than they are about inequality across places. These are often big things. Policy Exchange were probably one of the early think tanks and policy groups to think about levelling up. It was unpopular, a report that they famously wrote, which was somewhat unfairly simplified down to everybody should leave the north and move to the south. But that was clearly a people argument. What the report cared about was levelling up people's opportunities within the UK. And places could take second place to the importance of people. But I think we would also look at institutes like the Resolution Foundation or the Joseph Rowntree Foundation or the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, who we'll hear from later. And when we think about these organisations, I think most strongly what they care about is the best life for the most number of people for all of the UK, without caring too much about whether the person whose life we want to improve, dare I say, whose life we want to level up, is in a particular place or not. So that's your difference between people and places. I think as a clue, if the name of a think tank or policy group or advocacy organisation has a place in its name, it's probably going to be interested in places. And if it doesn't, generally it will be interested in people above places. And I think we can also look in another, if we look at the second angle, which of these organisations think about the economy. I think if you read anything from Centre for Cities, and we'll hear from Centre for Cities later, you will hear them talk a lot about strong economies, growing GDP, increasing productivity. I think if you listen to someone like Centre for Towns, you will hear much more talk about universal services, improving well-being, increasing dignity. And this is a clear distinction between not just the two organisations and which places they most proudly represent, and the clues in the name on that one, but also what kind of outcomes they would like to see. And I think ultimately, again, everybody's ultimate outcome is better lives for as many people as possible, but the way that they approach that thinking is often quite different. I think if you look at something like Resolution Foundation or the IFS, these tend to be organisations that are interested in incomes. So they believe rightly in the power of the tax and benefit system, the power of universal services, to provide incomes that are much more equal, both around the country, but also within society than they would be before we did any tax benefits, tax credits, redistribution within society. So those are the ways that I like to think about stuff. I think that all of this stuff is going to be on the web after the event today. The key reason why I want to wait is that I want to hear what everyone says and try and put them into the 6 boxes I've got. And these are the words that I'll be listening to for the last minute. So I think that people are going to talk about, if they are places people, they will talk about geographies. The big fights about within the places world of levelling up is geography. So we're talking about NUTS 1, NUTS 2, TL2, TL3, FUAs, PUAs, towns, cities, rural. I think there'll be a disagreement between many people on algorithms for measuring inequality, since inequality is largely what we care about, where we talk about Gini, dispersion, coefficient of variance, standard deviations, 80-20 ratios, top 1% ratios. I think we'll also talk about inclusion in many senses: gender, ethnicity, immigration status, name, education, class. There'll be many. And lastly, I think on well-being, I think we'll talk a lot about well-being and hear a lot about well-being today. I hope so. Life satisfaction, health outcomes, education outcomes, poverty, child poverty, unemployment, employment. And I think two that I would really like to hear about are community wealth and civic pride. And specifically, if civic pride is important, how shall we measure it? Because all of the rest, I think we're quite good at measuring, and that one we're not. So that's enough from me. We'll look forward to hearing from people. I will be working hard to put everybody's talk into a little table of which of the 6 mixes of people, place, economy, money, and services I think they're in. So that's it from me.
Here's Tom.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
It's
Welcome,
me.
Tom.
So My role at this stage is to do two things, I think. One is to wrap up everything that we've heard, and the second is to say what we're going to do now, because as Paul has said, I think now 4 times, he doesn't like reports. He wants to kill all reports even, and we want to know what we're going to do next. So the first thing I'll do is answer a question which I've been asked to answer, which I think was a really important one, which that was by Janet Bousted in a question. And it's something that's very important and challenging. So Janet asked about lots of measures of inclusion and diversity, including gender equality and other inclusion issues, or all sorts of things. And how does that fit into levelling up? And I think it's quite important to note that I think Nancy Hayes' talk from What Works Centre for Wellbeing did talk quite a lot about those type of things, but not much. Or I think Alan Rees at West Yorkshire Combined Authority talked quite a lot about that. And I have to say that this is one of the biggest challenges that we have to what would probably be my view on levelling up, which is a very much a place-based approach, which is that if we focus too much on places and too little on the diversity of people who live in them, we could end up creating some pretty bad decisions for quite large sections of society that are underrepresented or discriminated against, even if they're well represented. So a specific example of that we see quite importantly is that many of the places in Europe with the strongest economies also have the most ethnically diverse populations. And we might be tempted to look at the ethnically diverse populations of, let's say, London, Paris, Rome, and start saying, well, it's excellent that we are having a very strong economy with high incomes in these places which are ethnically diverse. And if you don't actually look at who is earning the big money and who is at the top of the big firms and who is doing really well, you could completely miss the fact that there is still a huge problem with inclusion. I think that we also have the same thing with gender pay gap. And in the UK, we have fantastic work, fantastic data on gender pay gap within firms. That's something that's come out in recent years. It was a big push, I believe, under Theresa May's government to say we really are going to push hard on releasing gender pay gap data. It's well ahead of a lot of other countries in the world. We haven't done that well at getting gender pay gap down, but we at least know the problem that's there. And I think that's also one of the problems that we might see with the talk that we had from DCMS on tech strategy. So I think that it's pretty well known that data and tech industries have a particular problem with a large gender pay gap. If we are going to increase the productivity and increase the success of these firms, we do run a risk of increasing the gender pay gap as we do it. Now, my suspicion is that any kind of place-based approach to looking at this will completely miss all of these areas of exclusion. And so that's why I think really we all ultimately agree that we have to think both about places and about people. So if you click on the link which I have pasted into the chat, you will go to the open document, which Open Innovations runs for all of our events. You'll find that off the Hub website that you probably got to this event from, and if not, just search for Leveling Up with Data on Google and you'll find it pretty well. And I'm down at the bottom in the What We Will Build Now section. And I should say, we had a vision going into today about what different types of leveling up were, what different visions of leveling up could be. I think the two most extreme visions that we've seen are What Works Centre for Wellbeing and Nancy saying we want more equal well-being. Hello.
Tom, you can share your screen. There's a button at the bottom to share your screen if you'd like.
Do I dare?
The one with the arrow, present to audience.
Present to audience. Let's see how this works. Okay, so hopefully people can see that now. And this is a document that you can all access by clicking on that link that we shared. So we had a vision, different visions of what leveling up would be. I think over here at the top right of my table, which is more equal well-being and access to services, and that's for everyone. That's a people-centered approach. I think we had a fantastic presentation about the data that we have now in England and Wales, especially, with some opportunity to improve in Scotland and Northern Ireland about well-being and how we can use that to inform what we want to level up. And I think that indexes of they're all quite life satisfaction and or misery really should be informing much more of what we do. I thought Tara's talk as well was fantastic on that. And one of the things I really liked that she said was we shouldn't just consider leveling up in terms of the things that we can measure. Just because it's quite easy and well established to measure income, GDP, unemployment, doesn't mean that those things are necessarily what we should be targeting. Probably life satisfaction, a sense of community, a sense of well-being are more important, at least. And then I think we saw the other kind of extreme, I wouldn't say extreme, the other side of that, which is to say, Paul's talk just at the end from the Centre for Cities, and I think to a certain extent also what we heard from DCMS on their tech strategy, which is that we do want to have a place-centred approach. We want to look at which places are doing well, and we want to probably look at the economy in terms of that. That's a good way. So Paul talked a lot about productivity. That's GDP per worker or GDP per person, and we want to think about where we have opportunities to increase that. And I think the point about being realistic on what we might achieve was so important. We might reasonably want, as a society, to have equality of opportunity and outcomes for everybody in society. But it's probably not reasonable to even hope for equality of productivity across all of our different and varied places. Because every place is different, the things that produce monetary value are not what produces societal value, and the things that produce monetary value change very quickly as different types of goods, services come in and out of fashion, and we shouldn't probably be targeting that. So I really like that angle that says, yes, let's think about how we might level up and reduce inequalities within the UK, but let's set our target probably not at full equality, just something reasonable that's better than today. And I think that's something we should probably be realistic about. I thought that the point that both Tom Bridges and Alan Rees made was really important on local power and local involvement. I haven't got the column for levelling up local power and local involvement. I note that Andy Haldane, the first thing that he said was that local leaders should be empowered to make local decisions using local data. And it's interesting to think how we might measure local empowerment. My suspicion is that, just listening to what Alan Rees from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority said, my suspicion would be that we might be able to count the number of competitive bids for funding that every place has to do. Because when you're writing a competitive bid, you are not able to do what Tom Bridges said about convening local government people, convening communities to decide the way forward. The community cannot decide its own way forward if it then has to submit it to someone 200 miles away to have a scorecard decide whether they will or will not be allowed to do that thing. So I think that we probably need another column on this table to say, so there's got to be some measure about local empowerment. I thought that it was fantastic that Alan Rees from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, and I know that the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Babin, has been really really keen on this is let's get up a really early version of the dashboard so that we can share the direction that West Yorkshire wants to take in terms of levelling up. I think it is important to remember that levelling up has to occur within West Yorkshire, not just West Yorkshire and the rest of the country. And I think that applies probably absolutely everywhere. So there is no part of the UK which, even if it currently has a strong economy, high incomes and good life satisfaction, doesn't have very significant parts of its own area which don't meet that ambition for enough people. So I think that's where we are. We have this table. We've seen lots and lots of ideas about ways that people are currently measuring our progress on levelling up, the size of the challenge that we face, and also existing dashboards that people have built. So the next stage for us is to try and build for currently 6 squares what a dashboard looks like. I suspect that we're going to end up with 8 squares because I do think that this local empowerment issue is something that we missed out on before today's event. I think most excitingly, we've got a huge opportunity to draw on all of the work that other people have already done so that we can populate these dashboards very quickly. I think the announcements that we've heard from the Government Statistical Service and the ONS on the level of granular data and timely data that will be available at small areas is, I find it astonishing. To think back 6 years ago that we could be having that level and quality and timeliness of data is really amazing. So it's clear that the data has caught up a long way. I think the data has overtaken our ambitions 5 years ago, and it's only because our ambitions on this issue have grown that the data still needs to keep catching up. I suppose the last thing that I would say about this stuff is we will be building these dashboards. We will be saying these are ways that we might want to measure what our gaps and what needs to happen in order to do levelling up and track our progress on it. I probably would want to finish what I'm talking about with coming back to what Tom Bridges at Arup said, which is that more and better data is really good and it's really important, but ultimately we need to be building a coherent strategy and having a plan and being realistic and just understanding that a dashboard is there more to track our progress, to challenge us to be clear and consistent in what we think levelling up is, what the different aspects of levelling up are and how we want them to all interact with each other, and to track our progress. But ultimately, it feels like it can only be part of the discussion and probably not the most important part of the discussion, because ultimately it should just be feeding into good policy making and good decision making and all of the kind of things around community involvement, place involvement, and decisions taken together that we probably all agree is important. So I've been really happy with the outcome that we've got today. It's been a great opportunity for us to hear from, hopefully, a wide range of views on what levelling up might be and what the point of it all is. I probably think that there's been quite a lot of criticism about the fact that the government hasn't been able to define what it means by levelling up yet. We'll see if in the new year, when they finally release a white paper, they come closer to defining what they think levelling up is. But I also think we should maybe cut them a bit of slack, which is that given that we can't agree what levelling up is or should be, it seems quite unlikely that they're going to be able to. And that's probably fine, because all of us probably think that all of the different definitions of levelling up are important, and we just disagree on which bits are most important and which bits are least important. So we'll be taking away all of this stuff. We'll be building the prototypes of these dashboards. We'll be sharing them openly so that people can comment. And I suppose my last thing to say would be, we've heard from a wide range of views, but we certainly haven't heard from all range of views. If you think that we've missed something important, then we are really keen to hear about that, and to make sure that we include that kind of thinking in the work that we do. I think the summary that I read of the event today that was most powerful for me was by Casey Morrison, who noted quite early on in the session that there is a huge difference in approach between people who are taking the people-centered approach and the place-centered approach to leveling up. Clearly, we want to do something in leveling up that is a hybrid of the two. Place has become definitely important in UK politics and UK policy, and there is quite a gap for us to bridge in terms of working together on those things. So let's see how that goes. Hopefully it all goes well, but I don't underestimate the challenge that we will have.